Мене підняли десь без 22 по тривозі.
Did you hear? The plant, it is exploding. There is no reactor unit number 4.
Нам заборонялося в КДБ повідати про істинні причини аварії на Чорнобильській АЕС.
The temperatures in the reactor core were hot enough that the fuel would melt, like a lava, but a highly radioactive lava.
Сколько людей погибло сразу от острой-лучевой болезни.
The sarcophagus was built over the destroyed reactor, but was essentially propped up like a house of cards, and it was recognized that this was one day going to collapse.
We've seen those brave workers putting the construction together. We have seen the arch in nearly ready state.
Нужно какого-то одного дрона, чтобы разрушить труд тысяч людей за столько лет.
The fear that there will be another Chernobyl. It's enough just to say that word, and that means we're going to get affected.
The Chernobyl disaster on the 26th of April 1986 was the worst nuclear accident in history. The explosion left wreckage on the ground that will remain radioactive for 20,000 years, and blasted a cloud of contaminated dust into the sky.
There was really not that much appreciation in the first, not even just days and weeks, but even the first years, of the extent of fallout that had occurred at quite some distance, hundreds of kilometers away from the nuclear plant.
Chernobyl remains the worst nuclear accident in history, but at the time the Soviet state deliberately concealed the danger.
Somewhere, a clear decision was made to not tell the people.
Alla Kravchuk grew up near the plant and was studying music in Kiev when the crisis hit.
When the accident has happened, nobody was informed. We did not know about it until a few days later. We prepared the end-of-year exam, and I am a singer. So I was extremely sensitive to this dryness in the throat. But of course, that was nothing to do with physical condition. It was something which was not visible, but everybody felt it.
Alla discovered what was happening, not from an official source, but from evacuees fleeing her former hometown of Pripyat.
I learned then from my school friends in Pripyat that they were greeted by somebody in a hurry saying, "What are you doing? Have you not heard? There is an accident and the buses are about to arrive. We have to leave."
This town of 50,000, built for Chernobyl's workers, was now dangerously radioactive.
You have got levels that are absolutely, definitely exceeding the level you would allow people to be present in because of the agreed significance of the cancer risk.
Yet, critical workers like control room operator Alexei Brias agreed to stay, to prevent a new crisis in Chernobyl's other 3 reactors.
Після 26 квітня я пропрацював ще 2 дні на 3-му блоці. Я та інші займалися розхолодженням 3-го реактора. Він був зупинений відразу ж після вибуху. Але його треба довго розхолоджувати, зменшувати температуру поступово. Ввечері після зміни я повернувся в Прип'ять. Людей майже не було. Я знаю, що залишили в місті операторів, пожежників, міліцію. Тоді було прийнято рішення нарешті евакуювати і операторів.
Within days, only cleanup crews, known as liquidators, remained in a 30-kilometer exclusion zone. As they worked, radioactive debris continued to billow from the wreckage of Reactor Unit 4. Chemist Valery Sulimov evacuated soon after the explosion.
Maybe end of May, the Soviet government decided to put some steel structures above to get the kind of dome over the destroyed reactor. There's a shelter called a sarcophagus.
Alla's father Volodymyr, who'd helped to build Chernobyl, worked on the designs for the sarcophagus, or object shelter, as it was officially known.
Dad was allocated specifically for this job to create the up-to-date picture. What is reactor looking like now? What was the parameters? What was the current situation? It was extremely difficult to get original drawings because most of them were at the station and they were contaminated or non-existent. We are looking now at the drawings my dad was working, and the measurements had to be certified very meticulously, and then see the changes that were done after the explosion. We're looking at the exploded reactor. This is what had to be covered because the lid was blown up and has landed in a very odd position. Dad had a very clear understanding that you have to be there. You have to see the damage yourself.
The first stage was to get large concrete slabs up against the building. You basically built a concrete shell with a roof over the top of it that would act as a reasonable containment of dust and vapors.
More than 90,000 people took part on this building activity. They was not plant staff, it was builders from all over the Soviet Union. So it means approximately 200 days from the decision to completion of this facility. It's very, very fast. It's incredibly fast.
Meanwhile, Chernobyl's 3 other reactors were ordered back online to deal with power shortages. So plant workers returned to the exclusion zone, including nuclear chemists Valery and his wife Helena.
Our management told us, you can go to Chernobyl. It was nothing to do this to destroy the reactor. We did our regular work as before the accident for unit 1, 2 and 3.
Да, было чувство долга, что если не мы, то кто? Нужно делать. Вот мы и делали.
And we started to work in this system. 2 weeks you work at the plant and 2 weeks away.
У нас были респираторы, мы меняли одежду постоянно, ездили все время и ходили по станции в респираторах, в защитной одежде. То есть мы знали, где мы находимся, да, и что нам нужно делать, и в каких условиях мы находимся.
For that time, reactor 4 was confined by this object shelter, and we did nothing for reactor 4, nothing.
But for workers who were on the front line after Unit 4 exploded, like Alexei, there was no longer a place at Chernobyl.
В середині травня сказали мені нарешті, що все з моєї дози. Мені заборонили, звичайно, працювати в атомній енергетиці, працювати взагалі з радіацією. В мене був невеликий радіаційний опік під правим оком та виткою, серцем, суглобами. А офіційно променевої хвороби в мене немає.
At first, the official death toll was just 2, killed by the explosion. But shortly after, Dr. Alexander Bugar had treated others with extreme radiation burns.
Тоді не було променевої хвороби, тоді променева хвороба була заборонена комуністичною партією. Ну, справа в тому, що я знати знав далі. Ну, я зізвонювався із своїми лікарями, які залишилися в медико-санітарній частині. І інформація була, що практично більшість пожежних і більшість персоналу помер.
Although now far from Chernobyl, Dr. Bugar had been in close contact with many of the victims.
Да, чорнобильський доктор мене називав. Попрацював трохи, знову гірше. Там головні болі, слабість, періодична нудота, дуже погані показники крові, постійні, скажімо так, періодичні внутрівенні курси лікувань.
The death toll was later revised to 30. But some experts believe thousands died from radiation exposure, with thousands more getting ill.
Усі захворювання хронічні, вони усі від радіофобії, бо ми всі дуже боялися, переживали, і на цьому емоційному стресі у нас розвилися ці розлади хронічних хвороб, які у нас були. У мене почалися проблеми, болі в животі, головні болі. Мама згадувала, що я ледь не втрачав свідомість, і вона тоді мене відвезла на обстеження, і мене направили на лікування. Якщо взяти мою дитячу медичну картку, вона більша, не знаю, ніж якийсь там «Війна і мір» за розміром.
Widespread health problems were just one aspect of a vast Soviet cover-up. In the weeks after Chernobyl, the secret services moved to conceal the evidence behind the disaster.
The KGB came in and all the scientists were told this must not be released, you must not discuss this, what records have you kept, and they were all removed from them.
Після аварії я, також інші інженери, які працювали в НЧС, ми були вимушені підписати в КДБ, підписати документ. Нам заборонялося розповідати про мовою оригіналу істинні причини аварії на Чорнобильській АЕС.
3 months later, Soviet investigators briefed the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, and clearly pointed the finger.
Радянський Союз у доповіді на весь світ розказало, в чому причини аварії, і що причини полягають в порушеннях і в помилках, це різні речі, в порушеннях і в помилках персоналу. І мене, як і всіх, дуже дратувало, що офіційна пропаганда зробила винуватцями операторів.
Alongside operator errors, the report also hinted at problems with the reactor's design.
This was indeed a very specific Soviet type of reactor, the light water graphite moderated reactor, or RBMK type.
In all reactors, neutrons split atoms in fuel rods, releasing heat which boils water, producing steam to spin a generator. In most designs, the water helps maintain a steady flow of neutrons, keeping the reaction going.
Ми бували часто, пам'ятаю те, що нам розповідали, що це найбезпечніший засіб для виробництва електричної енергії. Його часто дуже порівнювали з принципом кип'ячіння чайника. Що може відбутися, власне, з чайником? Википить, і все.
All reactors use control rods to absorb neutrons, which slows the reaction down.
If you take control rods out, the power will rise. If you put them in, it should decrease. It's like driving a car, a little bit of fine tuning, just a bit to the left, a bit on the accelerator, a bit on the brake. Same with the reactor.
Unusually, the RBMK also used graphite to help manage neutron flow. In blocks surrounding the fuel rods, and on the end of each control rod.
This mix of both water and the graphite was really quite unique and had been studied in the West, and very definitely was known by 1986 to have quite potentially dangerous operating conditions. There were situations of the positioning of the control rods where you couldn't get them in fast enough, you wouldn't be able to slow the reaction.
Concerningly, these situations included when the emergency stop or scram button was hit.
В деяких ситуаціях, коли оператор натискає кнопку, червону кнопку аварійної зупинки реактора, потужність реактора не зменшується, а спочатку зростає, а вже потім починає спадати. Це недопустимо, це абсолютно нехорошо.
But reactor designs were a state secret, so most staff at Chernobyl were not told about this serious flaw.
Of course, the Soviet Union got round that by saying, here's the rule book, don't operate in those regimes. Because the psychology was the rule would not be disobeyed.
On the 25th of April, ahead of planned maintenance, unexpected events tore up the rulebook.
It had been decided that the Chernobyl reactor in late April would conduct an experiment related to how you bring a reactor back after there had been perhaps a power cut externally.
So they started on the 26th to reduce the power from 3,200 megawatts down to half. At that time, they got a telephone call from the electricity board in Kiev, who had noted that a normal or non-nuclear power station had broken down. So they said, could you please stop?
This pause was not part of the plan. There were no rules to follow. Even so, once the power shortage passed, the test resumed.
So the internal configuration of the reactor is being changed and adjusted to help try to make the experiment work, but it is producing what resulted in this unstable condition.
The reactivity started to happen, which made the reactor just increasing and increasing in power.
Realizing the reactor was out of control, operator Leonid Toptonov hit the scram button, exposing that catastrophic design flaw.
When that scram button was hit, the control rods were going to drop, so that these rods should soak up all the neutrons. The only problem was the first bit to enter the reactor had graphite, and that graphite that came in further increased the neutron population in the core.
So you were then into a thermal runaway, producing a lot of steam, massive amount of steam. There is a massive expansion, and that produces a huge force, enough to lift and blow the lid off the reactor. All these materials that were inside the fuel rods, all that radioactivity is now up in the sky.
Toptonov died 2 weeks later, one of the few official deaths from radiation sickness.
The reactor operator, to their death, said they didn't understand what had happened. They thought they'd done everything according to procedures.
As new information came to light, the IAEA issued a revised report, suggesting Soviet authorities had deliberately downplayed problems with the reactor design.
There was human error associated with what happened at Chernobyl, but there was also a design fault.
Вибух стався внаслідок того, що була спроба його зупинити реактор аварійною кнопкою, але через невдалу, краще сказати, недолугу конструкцію реактора він не зупинився, а вибухнув.
Of course, the people who were in the control room at the time thought that whatever they were doing, there was a single solution if it was going really wrong, which was the scram button.
Науковці знали, Про це не було внесено ніяких змін в інструкції, ніякої офіційної інформації для операторів.
I've stood in that control room, wearing PPE and mask, etc. I've stood with my hand over where that scram button was. And that kind of, for me, put it all into perspective. Genuinely, at that point in time, they didn't know that pressing that button was going to cause this incident.
Ми всі чудово розуміли, що причини не в помилках операторів. І зрозуміло, що ті причини, про які доповів Радянський Союз офіційно, вони не справжні. А справжні – це ті, про які ми маємо мовчати.
While the Soviets withheld information and deflected blame for Chernobyl, winds had blown radioactive dust across Europe. And as news of the cover-up also began to spread, faith in nuclear power plunged.
Chernobyl is a big sort of PR disaster with regards to nuclear technology.
Just had so many impacts. Some countries stopped their nuclear energy. The fear that there will be another Chernobyl. It's enough just to say that word, and that means we're going to get affected. We might get radioactivity. We might get cancer because of this.
Closer to home, the crisis deepened mistrust of the entire Soviet system.
Навіть уявити ми не могли, що щось може подібне статися, що це може бути якось небезпечно. І що таке радіація на той момент, я теж не знав.
The Chernobyl accident caused a lot of concerns and doubt, particularly in Ukraine and in Belarus, over the manner in which their republics were controlled from Moscow. And the call for independence rose all the greater when they realized how the Chernobyl accident had been managed.
The Chernobyl incident was almost like the sort of straw that broke the camel's back when it comes to the fall of the Soviet Union.
Once the Soviet Union disintegrated, hoping to learn the true scale of the disaster, former republics opened their doors to foreign scientists.
At that time, it was very important for international observers to come in because by then the people were tired of being lied to, tired of not getting all the information.
In 1991, I got the chance to go to Chernobyl on a research project where we wanted to measure in the environment and also study the effects of shielding in the buildings in Pripyat, for example.
I made my first entry into the zone and did some sample collection. And you saw mostly deserted houses. Workers weren't living there, because if you lived there, you get radioactivity 24 hours a day. But if you went in just for a few hours in a day, you get low enough levels that were tolerable for the work, just all part of a job that has a certain level of risk.
That was an experience which was mixed feelings, I think, because we went into apartments and you could see dolls and things from kids who was suddenly taken there away. It was a funny feeling to see the empty town.
In 1992, Alexander Sirota, training as a journalist, returned to Pripyat for the first time since the disaster.
І я пішов гуляти по місту, по містах, які були для мене пам'ятні, важливі. І, власне, саме тоді відбулася така дуже важлива трансформація. Я тільки тоді вперше справді зрозумів, що ми більше не повернемося. І в якийсь момент ми почали шукати втрачені архіви. Просто стало цікаво. Архіву аматорської кіностудії «Прип'ять-фільм», яка працювала колись у місцевому палаці культури. Цей архів взагалі вважався втраченим.
Alexander searched for a decade before finding an archivist from Pripyat Film with a treasure trove of footage from their hometown.
Він його зберігав не дуже у відповідних умовах, десь у підвалі, фактично відкритим, просто у цих банках жестяних. І в якийсь момент, знову ж таки, особисті обставини винудили його шукати тих, хто викупити цей архів. Ну, йому знадобилися гроші. Ми з цим впоралися, а потім протягом ще майже десятиріччя їх відновлювали, мабуть, вклавши ще на порядок більше грошей. Бо плівки були в жахливому стані, а їх було дуже багато.
This footage reveals a colourful vision of life in Pripyat before radiation forced residents to flee.
In 1993, I participated in an expedition to the Chernobyl.
This town is the town of Pripyat, as you see, is a very sad town because there are no inhabitants here.
We measured radioactivity in the air in the 30-kilometer zone around the Chernobyl reactor to see how dangerous it was. I had higher dose rate on the flight from Stockholm to Kiev than I had when working in the 30-kilometer zone. But when I visited the sarcophagus, then the dose rate went up, way up, 10 times.
The concrete and steel shelter built to cover Reactor 4's radioactive wreckage was starting to fail. Chernobyl's sarcophagus, meant to last 30 years, was crumbling after just 10.
The sarcophagus was essentially propped up together, so it was like a house of cards. It had holes in it, and over time it slowly got worse and worse. And it was recognised that this was slowly declining and one day going to collapse.
A collapse would throw up a new cloud of radioactive debris, which could spread across Europe once again.
Because of the physical degradation of the object shelter, it was decided to cover the envelope to prevent uncontrolled release contamination to the atmosphere.
The international community recognised that Ukraine was in an intensely vulnerable position in the mid to late 90s and was trying to deal with the consequences of the accident. And there was an act of solidarity with Ukraine to support them, to say that we want to stand with you to provide some sort of long-term solution.
That solution was a vast arch called the New Safe Confinement, costing $1.7 billion. Simon Evans helped manage the project for the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development.
The arch had two core functions, and one was to confine the remnants of the destroyed Unit 4, but the second one was to provide all the equipment and facilities for long-term decommissioning of the remnants of the reactor.
I met Simon Evans in the very beginning of the NSC project. He was the supervisor for the bank. I was on the contractor side. My role was to coordinate designers, and we did together the design documents.
Radiation protection and safety for workers was our key priority throughout the construction. There was one area where we were hitting levels that meant workers could work there for around 4 minutes a day. So the arch was built 400 metres away to protect workers from the impacts of radiation as you got closer to the old sarcophagus.
It was a quite exciting times. It was romantic time, I would say. Because you see one of the largest facility in the world growing up every day, every year.
Ну, я гордилась, что Валерий там начал работать, и он работал там с первого дня и до последнего. Вот. И хорошо, что западные страны собрались и начали разрабатывать этот безопасный конфайнмент, строить потом эту арку, потому что разобрать 4-й блок, разобрать все, что там под ним находится, самой Украине было бы не под силу.
I had been back to Pripyat in 2015, and the new confinement was nearly ready. And that was an extraordinary, exciting time. We wanted to see it in real life, and we were safely taken into the Chernobyl zone. We've seen those brave scaffolding workers putting the construction together.
For the first time in decades, Chernobyl was crawling with life. New life had also taken over the abandoned town of Pripyat.
I could not help asking if it's possible to drive and see my house. The answer was the area where our house was is a jungle now, so it was not approachable, but I was promised to be taken as close as possible. I saw the ruins of the central concert hall where I used to go to various concert events, and the beautiful mosaic was there, but all the windows were crushed.
The exclusion zones are like zombie films, but without the zombies. In that Mother Nature very, very quickly takes over.
Something breaks inside you when you see this happen, and you walk along the streets where everything was blossoming in roses and wonderful open spaces, and the trees are growing, breaking the asphalt. Nature was claiming back its territory.
It's a sort of stark reminder of how fragile human society is.
It was like a ghost town. It wasn't that beautiful place that once I knew.
Six years after construction began on the new safe confinement, the arch was complete. But to cover the radioactive wreckage, it had to be slid into place, a 2-week job.
We were constantly told by the engineers, don't you dare put us under pressure to do this fast, we're going to do this correctly. And that's what we allowed them to do. It was amazing, to be perfectly honest, because you had this world's biggest movable structure inching in synchrony. It was really something quite spectacular.
And they did it. This enormous structure came to the final place and was fixed there. It was so exciting.
It was intensely complicated, but it happened. When it slid over the old reactor, many people described it as healing a wound that enabled Ukraine to look to the future with the confidence that they had the infrastructure required to deal with the lethal inheritance of Chernobyl.
The arch was designed to last 100 years, which is long enough to slowly and very carefully dismantle the contaminated ruins inside.
You can think about the decommissioning challenge of Chernobyl as being like trying to eat a mammoth. And the only way you can eat a mammoth is a small chunk at a time. The idea was to essentially use hanging robotic systems to reach down and start to physically take the top off the sarcophagus and then reach into the core and grab by grab, remove the residual graphite and fuel materials. If you don't have the confinement, any aerosols that you make will escape into the air, they'll be carried by the wind, and you have no control over where that material goes.
A year later, Tom Scott brought more state-of-the-art technology to the cleanup effort.
This is Spot. This is our four-legged robot friend. We were the first people in the world to take a Spot robot and deploy it on a nuclear site. It just happened to be Chernobyl, which is also the most notorious. So the purpose really of what we're doing is to use robots to go into places that are dangerous enough that you don't want to send a human being. We went into the space around the sarcophagus so that we could control Spot and read out what he was recording. It was an amazing experience. I was always struck every time that we went in. It's a bit like a cathedral. It's so big and it's so quiet. This is a really historical place. People have died there, but it's just the size of it and the silence is really striking.
There is one object buried here, which only a robot-like Spot can safely inspect.
The temperatures in the reactor core were hot enough that the fuel would melt. In this material, it flows, essentially a bit like a lava, but a highly radioactive lava. It's what we call corium, because it's molten core material. And it flowed down into the basement, and quite famously it formed a structure called the elephant's foot, which is an incredibly radioactive structure. And the intensity is such that if you were going to spend several minutes next to it, then radiation sickness would be quite likely. What we were working towards was getting a better understanding of the degradation of the material and potentially even retrieving that material as part of decommissioning to allow us to start to contain the risk a lot better.
The reactor is just one source of intense radiation that must eventually be cleaned up. Tom and his team also studied several others across the exclusion zone.
After the liquidators finished with all of their efforts, all of the vehicles, the helicopters, they were all congregated together in this graveyard, and they still sit there today. There are some tankers which still have radioactive inventory inside the tanks. Those are some of the most radioactive things on the site, in fact. So there's a really big decommissioning job there to be done, which will take many decades.
With the arch secure and international experts collaborating on the cleanup, Chernobyl became a symbol of hope instead of fear.
I woke up because a friend of mine who is Russian has called to say, I'm really sorry. And at that moment, I didn't understand what she means. She said, I'm sure it will be over and everything will be fine. Please forgive. I said, what do you mean? And that was the morning when Russian troopers have attacked Ukraine.
In February 2022, the Russian army entered Ukraine and swiftly headed for Chernobyl.
Call from my son from Canada. Hey Dad, are you sleeping? It was around 6 a.m. Yes, I still sleeping. War is started. My insider at Chernobyl plant showed me the picture of the camera from the main entrance to the administrative building of the plant. And I saw the Russian tanks on the square before the administrative building.
Chernobyl was the first site occupied as a result of the invasion because they came down through Belarus, and it enabled them to have a direct line to Kiev. The majority of the nuclear infrastructure was left undamaged. However, there was a tremendous amount of damage to non-nuclear infrastructure, roads, for example, bridges, site access fundamentally compromised. A lot of looting and damage of, for example, computers, fire equipment, all this sort of stuff, which put the site in a tremendously fragile state.
The Russians also besieged the town of Slavutich, where most Chernobyl workers were living, as were Valery and Helena Sulemov.
Когда захватили ЧС, да, там разбили линию, которая шла на Славутич. Мы 5 дней были без электричества, какое-то время без воды, без отопления. Было холодно, темно и страшно. И 25 марта российские войска зашли в БТРы, несколько машин, там танки, они прошли там. У нас в соцсетях наши друзья стали друг другу передавать, что давайте соберемся на площади, на митинг протеста.
We crowded in one place, then we roll out the big flag of Ukraine, and we went to the Russian soldiers. We heard some gunshot, machine guns. And then they pulled out the grenades.
Оттуда вышли офицеры, они стояли. Мы к ним двигались и кричали: «Домой, домой, домой, идите домой». Вот, они начали бросать слезоточивый газ, вот, шумовые гранаты, стрелять поверх голов. Ну, да, даже ранили 2 человек. Вот. Но мы все равно продолжали идти, продолжали кричать «домой». И потом через 3-4 дня они исчезли.
The retreating Russians ransacked Chernobyl.
Ну, даже сперли мой чайник. А вот так меня освободили от стола. Компьютера нет вообще. Телефон остался только старый мой, который я из дома привозила. Я шизею, блин. Сука, армия, освободите.
They left the arch and its deadly contents unharmed. However, as the war dragged on, tactics changed.
On the 14th of February, in the early hours of the morning, a Russian drone hit the north side of the confinement.
This drone attack, 14th of February this year, I was completely destroyed.
I was absolutely horrified. The drone hit the facility and it caused a fire on the membrane in the cladding, which spread all across the north side of the arch and also spread over to the south side and damaged the ceiling membrane of the arch. The main volume of the arch, underneath the arch, is kept at under pressure so that you have the air, the tendency for the air never to go outside to minimize the release of radioactive contamination from the old facilities.
So when you burst a hole in the side and you start a fire, what happens is the fire gets sucked through the structure. And so there's very, very significant fire damage on the inside.
One of the problems was that it wasn't just the area where the drone hit. In order to put out the fires, the fire brigade had to cut some 300 holes in the steel structure of the arch.
And that could have led to some radioactive material escaping out into the air.
The 2 core design functions of the arch have been fundamentally compromised, and the 100-year design lifetime of the arch has been basically destroyed.
I felt everything. I was angry, I was shocked. I didn't know what to do, what I can do, and what the consequences might be.
Там тысячи людей работали, чтобы это создать, и нужно какого-то одного дрона, чтобы разрушить труд тысяч людей за столько лет.
I do not believe we can get the full designed functionality, but we will try to be as close as possible.
Все, что делают сейчас русские, это акт не то что глупости, это акт варварства, акт насилия, бесчеловечности. Арка – это просто маленькая частичка того, что они уже разрушили в Украине, поэтому говорить об этом, обсуждать, называть какими-то словами, ну, практически невозможно.
The drone strike and the war have left an uncertain future, both for Chernobyl and the people who have lived with its legacy for 4 decades.
In the year of Chernobyl catastrophe when we were much younger than today. It was a kind of adventure, really. We did not feel the fear.
Я горжусь тем, что я была к этому причастна. Действительно здорово, что мы своим трудом, в общем-то, помогли справляться с тем, что там было.
Участь в чорнобильських подіях, в самому гарячому етапі, з перших годин після вибуху, я вважаю це трагічний, але дуже важливий етап в моєму житті, в якоюсь мірою це навіть подарунок долі бути причетним до події такого великого, без перебільшення, біблійного масштабу.
Forgotten heroes and critical choices, the world's biggest cleanup after the world's worst accident. Chernobyl, 48 hours to escape is streaming now. 9 o'clock tomorrow, and both international relations and credibility in ruins. The concluding part of Suez, 24 hours that broke the British Empire. Celeb Gogglebox is here next.